What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the best guests in all of true crime. And these guests are so good, they're here every week. It's time to get your true crime fill with Fil and Gil, except you'll notice neither Fil or Gil are here at the moment. Fil is running a couple minutes late, and the great Scott Duffey is filling in for Jonathan Gilliam. You guys know Detective Phil Waters. He is America's most respected detective. Worked 23 years in the Houston PD. Worked more than 400 homicide cases, including one that took the life of his good friend and fellow police officer. Detective Phil Waters is also a Marine and the owner of KINDRED Spirits Investigations. He starred in the show The Interrogator. The man in the hoodie is Scott Duffey, director of Wilmington University's Criminal Justice Institute. He worked out of the Wilmington, Delaware office. He worked violent crime matters, gangs, bank robberies, and fugitive task force cases for 20 years before being promoted to supervisor of the Violent Crime Task Force in Wilmington, Delaware. And prior to the FBI, served for 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer. Couple quick housekeeping notes. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. You can also find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can support us on Patreon, and you can subscribe on YouTube. And as my 8 and 7-year-old daughters say, please hit that subscribe button and the like button. It gets the algorithm chugging. So without further ado, it is Friday. Let's have some fun. And we will get right into it here. There is some news. Scott, do me a favor. Just mute yourself until you get cracking, if you don't mind. Getting a little, yeah, there we go. Awesome. Okay. So we're getting a little news with Brian Kohberger today. This is actually coming out of News Nation, the new news station out of Chicago. They say that there are sources close to their news agency that are now shedding light on the Idaho college killings. And now they say, the source at least says to News Nation, and keep in mind, news leaks, it's not always, this has not been corroborated. It could change, but it is out there today, so I wanted to discuss it. And according to the source, Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan were killed first. And the sources, multiple sources, confirmed that Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle were killed on the second floor afterward, according to these sources. Hearing that, Scott, and you have to unmute yourself, and I'll mute myself because I think we're having a little audio issue. What do you make of that Kaylee and Madison were killed first, Ethan and Xana second? Does that give you any indication into a possible target?
It can, if there actually was, if one of the four were a target as opposed to the house being the target and several of the victims being a target, right? That's still unknown. If it was a single target with, as I've heard of and could agree with, collateral damage, that is bystanders who are unfortunately caught in the struggle. If there isn't one particular, and he kind of had his sights on several, sure. But it does make sense, at least from what we've learned, both, from inside sources, but also what's been put out there in the investigation, that the two girls found on the third floor, that they were found on their bed. And ultimately that would tell me a twin bed, that those victims did not fight back. It just would defy reason that two people could be violently attacked and remain on a bed. So it would tell me that the two were probably killed in their sleep or whatnot, but not offering much of a struggle. And then, of course, as they found the sheath in that room, which would, as I've seen and would agree with some experts out there that said that would probably be the first place, because that's where it now happens. He's now committed to this act, and forgets, the sheath. The And then, of course, being on the second floor where both victims are found, close to one another, but not in the same immediate area. And that would tell me that there was a struggle. Not to mention, I remember hearing very early reports that there were signs of defensive wounds, which would indicate that there was a struggle from the onslaught. So,
And here he is. He has magically appeared, Detective Phil Waters. No one better to ask about this than he, because he has investigated 400 homicides. Phil, there is new news about Brian Kohberger. This is according to News Nation, which you appear on regularly with Ashley Banfield and others. There are sources close to News Nation shedding light on how the Idaho college killings unfolded. They are saying, the sources, Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan were killed first. And the sources confirmed that Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle were killed on the second floor afterward, according to the source. Hearing this now, what does that tell you with your years of investigative experience, if anything?
Sorry I'm late.
You're forgiven.
Yeah. So, and Scott, were we on Patriot Radio with Jonathan last week?
no.
We weren't? Okay.
Scott is FBI out of Delaware, and you two are just meeting.
I know I was on there with Jonathan with another FBI guy, and I thought it might have been you, but maybe next time. Maybe next time. Here we are. And I have an apology for you, Joel, before we even get started.
Sure.
Last week's discussion, which was interpreted many different ways from what it really was, I owe you an apology, because when I had talked about my first real job was at Baskin Robbins, and you said 31 flavors, and I corrected you and said 32. I was wrong. It was 31 flavors. So I want to get that on the record right now.
Thank you.
I am willing, more than willing, always, that if I'm wrong, I want to correct that.
The court stenographer has noted that. Thank you.
Okay. I don't want to be involved in any kind of perjury that I did not tell an intentional lie. So, okay. So addressing the circumstances that you're now talking about. Well, my view of this from the beginning has been to let the evidence lead those detectives where they needed to be. And there was speculation about who was attacked first and so forth and so on. And I had said then, in the course of these discussions, that I would imagine that at the scene, they should have a working theory about who was attacked first, just based on the blood evidence. And then they can put that together and kind of quantify that when they get the forensic DNA tests and so forth and so on, to see if blood is in one area and not in another, and so forth and so on. So this new revelation coming out from a supposed good source, and I always question that, we really don't know. We're just kind of going on the accuracy of this, but it tends to make sense that the Maddie and Kaylee were attacked first, and something caused Ethan to get up. He heard something going on. They're right above them, as I understand it, and so they may have heard the struggle, whatever it was, but something awakened him, and he's up, according to this source, and outside the door, in kind of in between, maybe in between the threshold and the hall. And At that point, you've got the evildoer. Again, I will not say his name, but you have him coming down the stairs after he's already done what he's done. And he runs into Ethan. Now, there's a question now about the witness that heard somebody say something like, "Can I help you?" or "I'm here to help you," or something like that. What we don't know, if that's accurate, that who said that, who made that statement. That sounds to me, and I'm just speculating here, it sounds to me like that may have been Ethan talking to the evildoer. Is there something I can help you with? That's what it sounds like to me. And then, of course, the evildoer is committed at that point. He's got a witness right in his face, so he has got to dispatch that witness as quickly as possible. He may or may not have known that Zana was in the room, and then when he starts his attack on Ethan, presumably may have driven him back into the room, or he may have dropped him the threshold. There's several different reports about that kind of thing. So, but he may have been pushed clear to the bed, and by that point, Zana knows what's happening, that there is something happening here that is not good. And this would explain the defensive wounds on her and the discussion about her, because of some of the wounds, particularly on her hands and her fingers, that she had grabbed the knife. So, again, I've said this from the beginning, that these kind of, the scene talking to these detectives would lay out the series of events and the order in which they occurred.
And so Cheetos, one of my favorite names, comments, "I knew someone fought back. That's why Brian ran out of the house, passing right by DM." I'm not going to use her name. DM is very lucky to be alive. She is the surviving roommate. Anyone who questioned her should be ashamed of themselves. And so I'm glad Phil brought this up, because as he just alluded to, there is more to it. These sources also say that Ethan Chapin was killed in the doorway of Kernodle's room, which, as Phil, I think, just said, makes it appear like he went to in kind of a protective mode into the doorway. And Xana Kernodle apparently fought back too. She, according to the sources, repeatedly grabbed the knife from Brian Kohberger, suspect Brian Kohberger, and she suffered deep cuts to her fingers. Ethan Chapin, apparently suffered a slash to the neck, according to sources. I'm curious, Scott, and keep in mind you're still muted here. Do you see it the same way as
Yeah, I would agree. Well said. And you're as a lot of this is speculation based upon sources, but at the same time, also what law enforcement has come out there, and we're talking about a struggle with a knife, and if one of the 101 forensics is that if the hands are torn up, if there are these stabs and wounds, and as you had read, severe gashes to the fingers, that obviously is someone who is defending themselves and putting up a fight. So well said.
Thank you.
so?
Well, let me add something here too.
Go ahead.
And again, we're going on this information being accurate. It sounds to me like it is more likely to be accurate than not. And the other thing that it tells me is that the evildoer, I don't think, and it's just based on what I'm seeing here, knew that Ethan and Xana were in the house. I think he was so focused, so which leads to another question. So Madison and Kaylee are killed first. They are together, from what the family has said, what everyone has said about them, all the time. They've been good friends, I think, since the 6th grade. So what that tells me is that whoever that the evildoer had a problem with, it was those two. It was both of them.
That was my next question. So you are now, assuming this is true, you would be convinced that Brian Kohberger was either going after Kaylee or Madison, and that's why he entered the home to begin with.
Yes. And so, and because we know that Ethan and Xana came in later, and they're arriving at different times. And I think that the discussion was that they arrived home, I think, between 2 and 2:30 in the morning, and that they believe that the homicides occurred between 3 and 4 a.m., something in that time frame, which would indicate to me that he didn't know they were there. And so when he got finished doing because he went right to, it appears from this information, and I'm sure the blood evidence and the transfer is going to explain all that, goes right to Maddie and to Kaylee, does what he does, comes downstairs, and he gets startled by Ethan because he doesn't know he's there. And Xana's there. So he does what he does then. And at that point in time, if everybody's wondering why this witness, he didn't see her, he wants to get the hell out of there. He's already been startled and confronted, and he's now scared at this point, I believe. I think that he had a lot of great confidence when he was doing what he was doing. But once this happened, when the unknown came in, it scared him. So he is trying to get out of that house. And depending on where this witness was, which my impression is that she's kind of peeking through a door. But be that as it may, he's not focused on it. He gets tunnel vision. He's had tunnel vision anyway. Now it has increased exponentially. And he is only thinking about getting out of there. So everything going on around here is a blur. His ears have shut off. He's doing everything that happens when a police officer gets involved in a officer-involved shooting. These things really happen when that adrenaline starts to flow in the use of deadly force of some kind. So there's no question in my mind why he didn't see the witness. And then he hits that door and he hits it running, and he's off to the races. So the other thing that tells me just very quickly here is that this scenario, again, if it's accurate in the way that I see it and try to assess it, is reminiscent of the Nicole Brown, Ron Goldman murders. Because Ron Goldman, and I know people don't like this term, I'm going to use this as a homicide term, but Ron Goldman was collateral damage in that particular incident. And I believe in this one that Ethan and Xana were as well.
And of course, Phil is talking about O.J. Simpson there. Phil, I'm just curious, since you are the master of solving the homicides, if you knew this information prior to interviewing Brian Kohberger, would you approach the interview with him differently than if you didn't know this information?
No, I don't think I would approach it differently. It would be just something that I'm going to catalog here in the memory bank, because eventually we're going to get, if he's willing to talk, we're going to get to that point. And it may be that, and of course, it depends on the way the questions are phrased and his response and so forth and so on. But I think it would be just information in preparing for that interview that would be brought into the conversation at the right time.
Do you have a standard first question with everyone that you start your interview with?
Yes.
And what is it?
Well, you asked me a closed-ended question there, Joel. So the first question that I ask is, what do you want me to call you?
Okay. I think
because you may have a street name, and then you have your birth name. And I may have mentioned it on here before, but I've seen my partner get caught up in referring to a suspect by their street name, and the response was, "You don't know me well enough to call me that."
Yeah. I think
So
you
I
did
learned a
mention
lesson from that. And my first thing is to ask them, "What do you want me to call you?" Because I do not want to be. Remember, I enter all these conversations with dignity and respect, treating them that way, and so I want to be respectful of that. I always introduce myself as Phil. You can call me Phil. What would you like me to call you? So that's my first question.
Scott, how about you? Do you have an opening question for when you're interrogating suspects? And by the way, Phil does not like the word interrogating. He likes interviewing. So when you're interviewing people.
I'm right there with Phil on the. It's an interview that goes up and down, but interrogation just has that negative. So I totally agree. It's ultimately I would do the same thing. I'm introducing myself into the conversation, and to me, it's a conversation. And I always talk about let's just pretend we're on a couch or on two recliners, and we're just either enjoying a beverage or watching or whatever it is, and just trying to figure out what connects us. And so thereby it would be the same thing. My name is Scott, who happens to be an agent with the FBI. That way the title's out, it's done, but they know what they can call me, and I do the same thing. I don't want to get off on the wrong foot by calling them something that's offensive, and that's it. That sets the stage. So I would rather know from them, and there's also adds to the consent. Hey, thanks very much. My name is so and so, and then the conversation continues, and that's when you slip in and a couple other things with regards to continuing the conversation going.
Very interesting. Very small detail, but an important one. Hello to Simon Shattuck, who's watching in the UK. Good afternoon to Cindy, who I don't know where she is. Gorgeous Junk, one of my favorite names, is here. So Scott, I'm going to go back to you. This is a very Jay Thomas is a friend of the show, comments frequently, and he brings up an interesting point here. I know the point he's trying to make, and some people are going to be upset with him and for me for even bringing it up. But question: if I was found in a home amidst 4 dead, brutally murdered bodies and claimed I had been asleep, do you think I'd be treated as a prime suspect? And what Jay, and I'm pretty sure I know where he's going with this, people have said, if DM was a guy and she is one of the 2 surviving victims, if they were men, young men, and not women, maybe they'd be taking a lot of heat right now for that. It was almost an 8-hour span of time that passed. Does Jay make a relevant point here? Do you think that the surviving victims might be treated differently if they weren't women? And I'm not trying to victim shame. It's come up a lot. I'm just trying to see, and psychologists, the same way Phil was just talking about how police in a officer involved shooting, they get tunnel vision, adrenaline goes. Same thing goes with this. People freeze, they get frightened. No victim shaming here. Just wondering if you think the scenario would be treated differently if the surviving victims were men and not women, Scott.
Yeah, so right off the bat, I would say no, they wouldn't be treated differently. You know, the police are entering; they're totally in the dark, and you know, a police officer's first response and primary is saving a life. And so, if you have, obviously they're coming across a crime scene, a brutal crime scene, but they're also looking for additional victims. So here you have additional victims who are not killed, who had not suffered the way the other 4 have suffered. So, you know, and I've said it before, a victim acts so many different ways, and trauma affects us so many different ways. And so you have to put that in the full package. And I would imagine responding officers and then ultimately paramedics and EMTs coming on are there to assist and get people, first of all, out of the crime scene to a secure and safe location, and then beginning addressing. So, as Phil has said, and as you have said in prior shows, this is um, first and foremost respect for victims, deceased and alive. Everyone in that house at that time is a victim, and so the surviving victims act in a way that is going, whatever coping mechanism they have in place to put, and they're sheltering in place, who know, what they have seen and heard, and then to protect that. So no, and then police are going, like anything, you enter into a domestic situation. um sure, you're going to you're not going to leave anybody out as a possible suspect, because you don't know what took place. But you're also treating those who have survived, men or women, regardless of age. It is that they know, law enforcement knows enough that um, victims respond very much differently. And I wouldn't. It is not surprising that this victim turned about and went back to the room. It's just not. It's not shocking to me.
Phil, your take on this?
Well, I would agree with Scott. Look, what people don't understand, I think, and especially the critics, don't understand what happens when a patrol officer makes a scene like this. So once the patrol officer realizes what has occurred, his first responsibility is to make sure that the area is safe, is clear of any other threats. The second thing is secure that scene. Then to identify any possible witnesses and get them separated and isolated, which means putting them, if there's 5 witnesses, you put them in 5 different patrol cars, or you put them in 5 separate areas to separate them so we don't have people getting together formulating a story. This is just police work 101. This is what happens. And it's the officers that are responding. Remember, they're not going to respond in an emotional way. They have been trained to respond to scenes like this, and they have a responsibility to secure that scene as best as they can for the investigation that is now going to be conducted. So when I read the critics about why didn't the police do this and why didn't they do that, well, they've been watching too much television. And this is real life. And I know that some of the things that I have offered, especially regarding videos and certain current events, has been from the perspective of a detective who doesn't have an emotional response to what is happening. I want to get to the truth and have an understanding about why this occurred. What was the cause and effect? So that's what people need to understand. When people like Scott and I are talking about these topics, so some of them are very, very, very hot topics, that's the perspective from which we are looking at these events. We're not looking at them as emotional. Oh my gosh, this is horrible. Oh my gosh, what do we do? What do we do? That's just not the way we have carried our careers. That's not the way we have conducted our business. This is not the way we have been trained to respond to these types of events. So once that happens, and Scott has already said it, look, it's as important to eliminate suspects as it is to find the right one. So as Scott has said, anybody, while they are going to be separated as witnesses, once the investigation begins, they are all going to be considered suspects, and they have to be eliminated along the way. So these people that got out there and started talking about this witness that was in the house, and she must have been involved, the question was, would they be treated different if it was a man? I agree 100% with Scott. No, because these are individuals that were at the scene. They're all going to be treated in the same view. And that's going to be objectively. They may be this person, they may not be. So I agree wholeheartedly with what Scott's evaluation was.
And Phil, I get the idea that you've got to strip emotion. You're trained that way. But do you have scenes to this day that images that you can't get out of your head that still gnaw at you?
Oh, sure. So what are you trying to do? Get me choked up here? What I will tell you is this. We made every dead baby case in the city of Houston.
Wow.
That wasn't a medical death in a hospital. And I'm talking SIDS deaths, co-sleep, some of them as a result of child abuse. But every child, every dead baby, we made those scenes. Now, I've always believed that we only had a few of those in us. And I can tell you, and you know, I've shared with you the scene that I never wanted to make was a friend of mine who's killed in the line of duty, who is executed. And it turns out that it was a personal friend and had to conduct that investigation. So I can tell you as an example, I had to compartmentalize what I was looking at and what I knew I needed to do to further the investigation, to find the right person who's done the wrong thing and make sure that Tim had some justice served. So it was only 2 days later, on the phone with my wife, that I was finally able to let the emotion go. So trust me when I tell you, guys that do what I do or what I did always retain a little bit of every investigation that they were involved in. Because the approach that I took and that everyone that I knew that worked homicide took was that it didn't matter whether it was a crack monster in the ditch or a socialite in River Oaks, the high society section of Houston, and anything in between. Those people were someone. They meant something to somebody else. They were somebody's father, they were somebody's mother, somebody's brother, somebody's sister, somebody's cousin, somebody's friend. They mattered. And it didn't matter what flavor they were. It didn't matter where they came from, didn't matter where they were on the socioeconomic ladder, didn't matter skin color, didn't matter what race, creed, color, it didn't matter. The fact is that they mattered. And every investigation that I conducted and every one that I saw conducted was done in that manner. That was the approach that was taken. So all of those things that the critics will say, to me, they can live in that, Orwellian world if they want to. But I'm talking about reality and the way that it does affect people who do what I did. And so to answer the short answer to your question was, did anything ever stick to me? Do I ever have those images? Yes.
And that is why we thank first responders. That is why I'm a big supporter of law enforcement. And the next time you're quick to throw law enforcement under the bus, just think of Phil and Agent Duffey here. Gorgeous Junk writes, I heard that Xana's fingers were almost severed. She was fighting so hard. I mean, that's a really graphic image, but it does go to show you apparently how hard she was fighting. Scott, to you, F. Moynihan, my eyes are really starting to go, by the way. It would mean he knew where he was going when he entered the house. Been there before, ? That's an interesting point. It looked like he was going after his targets, which appeared to be Kaylee and Madison. Is that how you read this too?
Yeah, I would say somewhere he's gathered some information, whether and I don't know from watching. Let's just say we know through what law enforcement has already provided us that his vehicle was there at least 12 times. 12 times they know of, right? And so let's just take a leap and say that was doing surveillance, etc. So he's very familiar with the house. I don't know enough from what I've seen. If you sit outside the house long enough, what can you see between the different floors from the all different sides of the house? Um, so it's possible if he was targeting the two girls on the third floor and that they are his first victims, thereby his target. How did he know that? It's, if he's following them and is able to see them enter into the house, is it possible that he sees them through the windows? We are talking about college students, and so he can probably gather a lot of information just from staying outside. Is it possible that they had entertained and he makes his way in, into a college house and nobody's asking questions of who's coming and going? It's possible. And law enforcement definitely is going to find that out. So, it is interesting. I haven't heard how entry was made, as opposed we know how an exit was made. And so if he does enter the same way he exited, obviously that took something where he was able to enter without anybody knowing on the second floor, make his way upstairs, and then make his way back downstairs. So it's a great question. I would say he definitely had information, whether he was actually inside the house or learned it from outside just by watching. I don't know.
And we're going to get to a little more Kohberger news in a second, but there's a series of comments here that are kind of interesting. The first one, Phil, from Claire Coward: because Kaylee was found on top of Maddie, Kaylee must have got up, then fell after being assaulted. And then this comment: isn't it possible Kaylee was sleeping in her room? I saw somewhere that even though she moved out already, the bed was still in her room. Maybe she got up when she heard a noise in Maddie's room. To this comment right here, Maddie was probably stabbed first, which woke Kaylee up. They did report Kaylee had defensive wounds. You're the expert. Any way for you to sort of piece together by what you're learning now of what you think the order may have been?
Well, in terms of what these comments are now, I wouldn't even begin to speculate. I don't know, and we haven't been given. I don't know where they're getting those details, but I haven't seen anything that would indicate necessarily the order of things in Kaylee and Madison's room and where they were and that kind of thing. I think there was a mention early on that I think Kaylee had some defensive wounds on her, and that's certainly possible. I think, but going back to the earlier comment about how he knew they were in that room, that is going to be a part of the investigation that is going to determine what the relationship was. Why was he even there in the first place? And so that's always been the question in my mind: is where does he know Kaylee and Madison from? Where did they meet, and what was the scope of that meeting? Obviously, it was not a good one, because we see what the results of it were in terms of what the evildoer did. So it will be interesting to find out what that relationship was. And as Scott's already alluded to, the house was kind of known, at least what I read, as being kind of a party house. A lot of people in and out of that place. Who knows? He may have shown up for one of these parties. That may have been the source of the conflict between he and Maddie and Kaylee. So there's a lot of pieces of this puzzle that are still need to be found and put into place. But in terms of falling and who did what first and that kind of thing inside that room, I would think that the forensic evidence inside the room and the blood evidence would be able to determine possibly the series of events in the order in the room at the time.
And rounding out the News Nation report, they go on to say that certain details conflict with what the coroner in the case and police initially said which was that all of the victims were likely in bed. The coroner also said the injuries were stab wounds and not slash wounds. So, there's some contradictions brewing already.
Well, can I address that real quick?
Yes, sir.
Look, those comments were made by that coroner early on, and I don't believe the coroner in Idaho, in that county, I don't believe she is a forensic pathologist. So I believe she was present for the autopsies in Spokane, Washington, but I don't believe that she's a forensic pathologist. And if I'm wrong, then somebody correct me. So for lack of a better term, she's giving a conclusion, or she's giving a description in civilian terms. So for her, a stab wound, in my world, it's a puncture wound or a slicing wound. I mean, there are different descriptions of those types of wounds, or a tearing wound. And she's not using that kind of verbiage. She's not using those kind of labels. So to say they were stabbed, well, that is a fact, but maybe that's not the truth about the way the knife was used. You understand what I'm saying here? So
Yeah.
she's not putting the information out there to try to deceive anybody or send somebody off in a different direction. She's just phrasing with terminology that people are familiar with. And so when she says they were stabbed, they weren't slashed, well, what does that mean? And so to me, it means something different than it does to maybe the people that are just listening to what she is saying.
So there's a conversation going on the side here about what the actual wording was, about, the "let me help you" thing. And according to Joseph Rapp, the correct wording that was used was, "It's okay, I'll help you." We still don't know, again, exactly who's saying that to who and why.
Well, that still could be Ethan. I mean, if the guy's standing there and he is clothed in the manner in which the witness described him, wearing a mask and black clothing, that to me sounds like, and especially if Ethan sees the knife in his hand, okay, I'm here to help you. So I can see where that would, at least, again, just knowing what I know, that would make more sense coming from Ethan than it would be the other way around. I mean, Scott,
well, two comments here. I want to get Scott's take. One from Mackenzie Malia here. Blood transfer, they should be able to tell the order. Followed here by Kevin Callahan. Joel, if they find Brian's blood in the house, is he toast? Ask Scott, please. Scott, I'm asking you, please.
Well, it's great if they find blood and anything else that they can, fibers and whatnot. So, the big question to us, the spectators, and the many experts that have weighed in any forum, is what is the connection from, and I like what Phil has it, the evildoer. So I'll say suspect, right? Why give this guy any more credence by mentioning his name? So ultimately, the suspect, this guy, what connection did he have to the victims, and has he been in the house before? So, and if he had consented to an interview, and typically, let's just say blood is there and DNA is there, and it puts him in the house, it's going to be up to him to say, but I've been there. I've been there plenty of times. I've had a relationship. Whatever it is. And then it would be a good, not a good excuse, but it would be his excuse and a good buy-in to say, and I've cut myself shaving. I've stayed overnight. I cut myself on a finger, whatever, to give plausibility as to why he had been in that house before, but not that night, right? And so, yes, having his blood and other evidence, obviously, the sheath itself on the third floor with DNA is awesome for law enforcement and continuing on. And my guess is there's plenty more, and that's why Idaho has those strict guidelines with don't disclose any more than what you have to through search warrants, affidavits, anything else that's made public through the courts. So yes, it's absolutely great to have as much evidence, physical evidence of him being inside that house, and the fact that law enforcement and the evidence collectors picking that up, whether it be through bloody prints, footprints, whatever have you, that has his DNA there, is, to indicate within that crime scene itself, as opposed to in a bathroom or something else, or in a first floor kitchen, whatever have you, that could show some sense of prior lawful entry. So it's great that it's there, but law enforcement can also piece it to the actual crime as opposed to a prior.
So now People Magazine has been all over this story, interestingly enough, and they have a new report out saying that 3 different students tell the magazine that they believe they saw Brian Kohberger at the Student Union building on the Idaho campus in the weeks before the murders, and they later recognized him after he was arrested for the murders. One student says it was really early in the semester, recalls Chelsea, a sophomore at the University of Idaho. He was at the food court of the Student Union drinking water. He sat by himself. Phil, as an investigator, what does this tell you? Other than he was on campus.
Again? That was pretty...
Says it was really early in the semester, recalls Chelsea, a sophomore at the University of Idaho. He was at the food court drinking water. He sat by himself. She goes on and says he was the type to stare. He wouldn't look away if you caught him staring, like he wanted you to notice that he was looking at you. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't say anything, just stared.
Well, I think I said early on that it appeared to me that he was a loner. So that particular description from that individual about what they observed about him doesn't surprise me. And I think that we are going to find out that he was socially awkward, and as a result was a loner, was more comfortable by himself. And when he thought that someone was looking at him, I'm sure he took it in the most negative way, and he's going to make sure that he's going to win the stare contest. He's not going to be the guy that blinks. He's not going to be the guy that looks away. It's going to be you, and he's committed to that. So I think that's, if that is accurate, if that's true, then that certainly gives a little bit more insight into the type of person he is.
It goes on here to say these are the same young women speaking, and this one who says that he was just staring says, I told my friend to not be suspicious, but to look at him because the eye contact was making me uncomfortable. It was so weird that we ended up leaving and eating outside because we wanted to get away from him. So to you, Scott, I know this is speculation, but is it possible that Kaylee and Maddie were on campus one time when he was there, and like Phil said, didn't let him win the staring contest or something other that triggered him? How important is it, though, that he was on campus ahead of the murders, according to these reports?
Well, I think it's another piece to the investigation to tie him to at least one of the victims, right? And as opposed to someone who moves from Pennsylvania to Washington and then just happens to step into Idaho by accident and picks that house, and then you have 4 brutal murders, right? That's tough to understand, or so thereby you start piecing together some sort of connection because of the brutality of the crime, and so I think all these possible eyewitness accounts are great. And I would imagine if the school has an excellent surveillance, which sounds like they do, and so thereby, if it's not too far in the past, that law enforcement is able to go try to, first of all, get every imaginable video of cafeteria, whatever these social gathering events, and then to be able to themselves put him where a corroborating witness has said that they had this uncomfortable staring contest, so to speak. So there, it's fantastic for law enforcement, and it's right now just eyewitness, and if they're able to retrieve video and then say without a doubt that the video corroborates what the eyewitness, that goes to show that he had been, and it's mentioned in the affidavit of possible stalking, right? That the possible crime of stalking is so thereby it just adds to another piece of their case, at the very least, of stalking.
A couple more minutes on this. I want to pivot for the last few minutes onto the Alec Murdoch trial, if any of you guys have questions regarding that case. But Elizabeth McNinch writes, Phil, with all those cars in front of the house, why would he think there could not be others in the house that would be awakened and could confront him? Did he simply just not care? Did he have tunnel vision? Was he intent on killing that night? What are your thoughts?
Well, I have no idea. He obviously had done some reconnaissance on the location, which would tell me that he's familiar with the cars that are there. Whether or not he was concerned that he would confront anybody, he goes in there in the middle of the night. He may have seen Maddie and Kaylee earlier, and we just don't know that. So I don't think that whatever caused him to pick the night to do this, he was obviously prepared to do it, hence the black clothing, the mask, and so forth and so on. So I don't know. That would have been an interesting question to ask him if he would have been able to interview him.
And then what about this? DM testimony, that's the surviving roommate, won't hold up. This is according to Big Baller, because the defense will simply state that she called friends instead of police and they contaminated the crime scene. Phil is shaking his head no already. Why, Phil?
Well, this is speculation. This is anecdotal stuff. And with all due respect to the Big Baller here, this is all speculation based on not knowing all the facts, all the circumstances. So I don't think there's I am confident that they have vetted this witness and she has given them everything that she knows, and they have eliminated the possibilities of other people going in there and contaminating that scene. And if they have, then if we have other DNA in there, and we do have knowledge of people that may have been in there earlier in the night, then they will go to those people. They'll take buccal swabs from them, and then they will test the DNA and then use that to confirm or, but then again, we don't know when they were in there. Kind of going back to what Scott was talking about when was DNA there? How did it get there, and when did it get there? So the big problem that the evildoer has is that his DNA is a mixture of that blood evidence at that scene. He's got a real problem.
Phil, bee's knees. Phil has always struck me as very the dude-esque, but with far better grooming. Look at that from the Big Lebowski. I love it. Phil is just looking.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
What was his? What was the famous line?
What was it? I don't remember it.
This will not stand, man. I think that was it. But that's a great movie, and I do appreciate that comparison. I take that as a compliment. I appreciate that.
There you go. Tom Ara writes here, there are 4 victims in this case, and all you have to do is look at Marie Hernandez's comment to realize that is not true. I was thinking about Ethan, and so Ethan is a triplet. So Ethan and his two other triplets, there's a strong bond between triplets or twins. It must feel like a part of them is missing deeply. I mean, to you, Scott, it's such a tragic story because
we lost your audio there, Joel.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was muted, but I was saying to you, Scott, I mean, it's devastating because there can be so many people. There are way more than 4 victims, and a lot of people are never going to come out of this okay. There's always going to be, and it's a horrible word, collateral damage in cases like this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Every family member and every friend, they're all victims in the sense that they are now suffering a loss, and so trauma just continues down this domino effect. And so yeah, I have several friends who are twins, and so it's always for me, and not understand what it's like to be a twin, and then to talk to twins and then say, hey, is it true? And they're like, yeah, it's true. And certain, so I can only imagine the deep connection on that level, but at the very least, family and friends who have suffered a horrible loss, for 4 people who are simply in the early parts of life getting an education, being out of the house, and declaring their independence. It's just unfathomable to me.
Yeah.
Well put, eloquently said. So let's pivot to Alec Murdoch for the remaining minutes. And my first question to both of you, Phil, I'll start with you. Obviously, you've been called to the witness stand many times. In this Alec Murdoch trial, for those who have not followed it very closely, he's accused of killing his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul, which is unfathomable in a most brutal of way by basically blasting their heads off with shotguns and other weapons, two different sorts of weapons. My first question, Phil, when you are called to testify in a homicide case, what is it like on your end? How are you prepped? How do you prepare? And what kind of pressure is there on law enforcement? Because it's your investigation ultimately that's going to be really scrutinized.
Well, in the cases that I was involved in testimony, what one has to realize if they're going to get into my line of work, that in a homicide, in a murder trial or a capital murder trial, and this is not an ego thing, this is just reality here, the jury is waiting for the homicide cop, because that's where this whole case centers around and their investigation. My preparation, I loved to testify. I loved it. This was like the show. Here we are. We've done this hard work. We have found this person, this defendant who did this thing. We found the right person who did the wrong thing. And now here's the opportunity to see that justice is served. So to make sure that happens, I would prepare myself by reading the report again. If I have interviews, I'm going to look at those interviews again, because they're going to play them in total in the trial. I'm going to sit on the stand. I have sat on the stand. This is a true story. These are all true stories, by the way. I've sat on the stand and listened to 6 hours of an interview played on the stand. And I'm sitting on the stand watching this thing. Now, I can tell you that when I get tired of hearing myself talk, which I'm sure most people will say is not very often, but when I do, I know that I've been on that stand way too long. But this is what you have to do. You have to be committed to this when you're in that trial testimony. And remember that you are speaking to the jury. You're not talking to the prosecutor. You're not talking to the defense attorney. You're not even talking to the judge. So when I'm on the stand and I've taught courtroom testimony, it is important that you connect with the jury. They need to know that what you are saying is accurate and it is the truth based on your investigation. This is where the evidence led you to, and it was to get you as close to the truth as you could get. And now here we are. And there needs to be that communication. And when you are asked a question, doesn't matter who it's coming from, defense or the prosecution, when you answer the question, you always answer the jury. Always. And you hope that you have a prosecutor that is on their game and knows when to object when you're in the middle of cross-examination. And I've had some prosecutors, quite frankly, that and you want to wait. You want to wait when you're asked a question if there is an objection, because I testified enough that I could get asked a question by the defense. And in my mind, I'm thinking there needs to be an objection here. And so I would a pregnant pause before I could begin to answer, because I want to give the prosecutor a shot at objecting. And there were a couple of times where they didn't, and I'm kind of like, oh, crap. Okay, here we go. Now, sometimes the defense attorney will, by mistake, will open a door that they really didn't want to open. And if that happens, if they let me go into a narrative, well, then I'm going to take full advantage of that. Because most of the questions that are asked of in a trial are going to be closed-ended questions. And especially from the defense, it's going to be a yes or a no answer. And we've always talked about, they'll ask that yes or no, like, is it possible? That's a favorite. Well, the answer to that question is yes. It is possible. Anything's possible. It's possible that pigs can fly. You know, anything is possible. However, when I would respond to that, my answer would be, sometimes it would be, in this particular case, no, it's not possible. Because the evidence doesn't lead to that possibility. And that would blow that right out of the water. Sometimes my response would be, yes, it is possible, but the evidence in this case doesn't make it probable. So there's a way to answer these questions and not be disrespectful. And the last thing you want to do is get in an argument with a defense attorney. And they will try to do that. And they'll do it in a variety of ways. They may do it. I'm a detective. When I introduce myself and the prosecutor says, would you please introduce yourself to the jury? I'm Millard F. Waters II. I'm a homicide detective. You speak, blah, blah, blah. Give a little brief bio of me. That is my title. I'm a detective. Now, the defense attorney may refer to me as officer, trying to get me to play on my ego here and go, wait a minute, I'm a detective, which is just a move to distract from the scope of the questioning and make me look like, you know, that's really important to me. So I don't say anything when they do the officer, or they might mispronounce my name. They may say, they may put an L in it. They may say Walters. I've had them do that. And I just sit there and wait and let the prosecutor correct them, say, no, it's Waters. If he wants to continue to do that, at some point in time, somebody is going to correct him. It doesn't need to be me, because I know what he's doing. He's trying to throw me off by saying, you know, he's going to do this. So, Joel, you're me on the stand, and the defense attorney says, you're wearing glasses.
Yes, I am.
The response is,
yes, I am.
And you're wearing it looks like a peach-colored shirt.
Yes, sir.
And you're speaking into a microphone.
I am.
And you have a large cardboard cutout of your mother over your left shoulder.
I do. I love her.
And you're also wearing fiberglass underwear.
You don't know that.
Okay.
I don't know that.
So how many questions did I ask you?
Like 4 or 5?
I didn't ask you one question.
Oh, you were telling me. Yes.
I just made statements to you, and you affirmed those statements. So this is what a defense attorney, a good defense attorney will do, they will try to get you in a pattern of answering a question the way that they want you to, in the affirmative, and then they'll throw some zinger in there like that. And if you don't catch yourself, then you're already set up to say yes. And then you've got to go, well, wait a minute. So there is a way to testify on our side of it that you have to, through your experience, you're going to gain it. You need, and I went through court testimony schools, and I now teach it. So yeah, there's a whole plan when you go into one of these. And I take my supplements, only my supplements, to the stand with me, because this is not a memory contest. So I get up there with my supplements, which they have copies, the defense has copies of. Everyone has copies. And I will address only what I did in my supplements. Now, they will always ask you, defense will always ask you questions about things outside the scope of what you have in your supplement, even though you were a part of this big investigation. And my response would be, you will need to ask that detective that question. I will respond to what I did and what is contained in my supplements. So it's if there's an art to the interview, there is also a kind of art to testifying in court and making sure that you provide the best testimony, because what is it all about? It's about providing the jury all of the truth about this investigation that will lead them to convict this person beyond a reasonable doubt for what they did.
You ever get nasty glares from the defendant who you put there, and how do you deal with that?
Well, that's funny that you asked that question. That is a great question, because I cannot think of a time, because most of the defendants I had interviewed. So I already had a relationship with them. And I've never, in my memory, I cannot tell you that I've ever seen one that ever glared at me for any reason. In fact, most of them would hang their head because they play the video of the interview, and there's no way they can say they were coerced, threatened, or tempted to do something outside of their confession. So no, I that's an interesting question. In fact, I've had most people at the end of the interview. I had one that apologized for keeping me in the room for so long. That was a 6-hour interview. He said, "I'm sorry I kept you in here," because he could have told the truth at the very beginning. But so, and most of these people walk out of there. I mean, look, I've had suspects ask me to pray with them in the interview room. So I'm just telling you, and that's and you don't bring God into the room. The detective never brings God into the room unless they do. So you don't want to get caught up into trying to see how good you are with Bible verses, because some of these guys know the Bible a heck of a lot better than I do. So you got to be, but again, this is experience, and you do the things you need to do to establish that relationship, so forth and so on. But that was a great question, and no, I don't remember ever seeing anybody glare at me from the defense table.
If you guys claim to be true crime fans and you don't find this interesting about what a detective who's been on 400 plus homicide cases goes through at a trial, then you're not real true crime fans. I could sit here and listen to Phil stories all day long. But Scott, to you, Sharon M. writes, and now we're on to Alec Murdoch here. The case had multiple mistakes the police made: walking on the area of the shooting, never testing the house, Murdoch changing his clothes, never testing drains or bleach if it was used. Very easy to scapegoat, again, law enforcement for messing up the crime scene. But at the end of the day here, and we're going to get into it for the last couple of minutes, there's some damning evidence against Alec Murdoch. But what do you make of this comment?
Yeah, I never want to add to a defense line, right? And ultimately, if you're a defense attorney and having been crossed by, and I'll say to add to Phil's comments about being on the stand, I always felt I got better, which with every testimony, yeah. And that was also because of defense attorneys coming up to you afterwards and being a teacher to where they would kind of lead you down and say, hey, that you did good. I tried this, I tried that. But ultimately, your police work, your investigation, and your marching on to the truth and for justice is going to stand up in any courtroom as well as it should. So here in the Alex Murdoch trial, and I will say anytime I saw something on Alex Murdoch, this is going back probably to when the housekeeper had fallen down, and it became a national news story because of the family of the Murdochs in South Carolina. It always just fascinated me as we gather with these pieces of information that come out, and then it just seemed like it was just one after another, to where now that being the murder of his wife and son. So this goes back though to how cushy is law enforcement with any high profile individual. And I could think of the John Bonet case out in Colorado. So it's easy that if law enforcement goes in and they don't do their job, talking earlier about an officer going into the house in Moscow. So you have living souls and they're witnesses, they're victims, but at the same time, they have to be vetted and ensured that they didn't play a part. And so here, if they're just not doing the job of an investigator, and that is, hey, I have a job here, no offense, secure the scene, and the job is done, it's going to survive. But if law enforcement didn't do that job, their primary job is secure a scene, gather evidence. If they're going in there with the slightest bit of, they treat him as just a victim and never vetted him, never did their job by securing the scene and gathering evidence at it's troubling. Everything that I've read and seen so far that's played out is troubling. And it sounds like there were missteps early on, and ultimately, the truth will come out. But it's, what is that jury seeing? They're seeing everything. And you don't want to play into the defense by giving them a poorly secured scene from the get-go.
I have learned that over the last few weeks. Now, Salt Phone here writes, Alec Murdoch getting tripped up by Snapchat after all the nefarious plotting and scheming to allegedly murder his wife and son is the most okay boomer thing that has ever happened in a murder trial. This is interesting, and what she is talking about, Phil, here, and I'm sure you know this, there are two videos that have been brought into evidence. There are so many interesting facets to this case. First of all, the exact time of the murders is still unknown. The state says they happened at 8:50 p.m. on June 7th. The coroner says it was about 10, 15 minutes later, sometime between 9:06 and 9:30. So there are two videos. One video is shot at 8:44, which would be 6 minutes before the state says the murders happened. And on that video, you can, according to witnesses, at least two witnesses say they are 100% sure it's Alec Murdoch's voice. You can hear his voice 6 minutes before the murders. There's an other video. There's been a lot of confusion about these two videos. The other video is actually the Snapchat video, and that is taken at 7:38 p.m. And in that, you see a totally different change of clothing. He's wearing a different shirt and pants. You are a seasoned investigator. Is that video, where you hear his voice literally moments before the murders, is that a game over scenario or no?
Well, I have said this before about other cases. I don't know that there is ever what I would call a game over scenario, because all of these cases are unique and they all have their strong points and their weak points. The scene stuff they missed at the scene. What you're hoping for there is that if there were mistakes made, and look, cops aren't perfect. I mean, crime scene guys aren't perfect. There's some that are more competent than others. Detectives, based on their experience and so forth and so on. So, I mean, things do happen. Most of the time, they are mistakes. They're not something that is intentional. And so, if there were some things missed at the scene initially, then what you hope for is that there are some more affirmative links around the corner that outweigh whatever the mistakes were. So it just doesn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, not to tell a war story here real quick, but we had a guy that a police officer, a patrolman, that when he would go to, he did this a couple of times. After the second time, I ripped him. But if it was a firearms incident, somebody was shot and killed, somebody was shot and taken to the hospital, whatever it was, he would secure the firearm, which is what he was supposed to do. But he would then disassemble the firearm and leave it in a little pile where he found it. Now, I couldn't imagine what in the world are you thinking that you would take a piece of evidence and take it apart and leave it in a pile on the scene. So I called him up, and of course, my first question was, "What the heck are you thinking?" And he said, "Well, it was for safety." And I'm like, what are you kidding me? And so then I proceeded to rip him that you just destroyed, a piece of evidence that maybe that's a big part of this particular scene. So officers do make mistakes, and you have to address those mistakes later on in the trial, of course. And so I don't know what the scope of those things are in this particular trial, but there is so much other evidence that leads to affirmative links that lead right to Murdoch that I don't know these little issues. I don't know how you overcome the bigger issues with these little mistakes. So I think the Snapchat video is just it's a huge component of the bigger picture. And so these pinning down times and this and that, unless you've got some sort of measures that go beyond the physiological changes that are taking place with the bodies. And that's what the coroner is going to be able to tell and usually, I mean, in Harris County, our guys, our medical examiners could give you a time frame, not necessarily give you it happened between 9:15 and 9:30, that kind of stuff. So that's a very, very hard thing to pinpoint unless you have some other evidence like a video or a timestamp somewhere where this is actually happening and this is where it starts, this is where it ends. So I'm curious as to what the autopsy revealed in terms of how long those bodies were laying there before Murdoch made his phone call.
And Phil, what do you make of the fact this guy is, third generation, maybe even fourth? I think it's third generation lawyer, and he spoke to investigators the night of the crime. What do you make of the fact? And people said he was an absolute dum-dum for doing that. That's a gift to you. What would you? How would you have handled this, knowing this guy comes from a lineage in this county? I don't know the comparison in Houston, but I know you approach everyone the same way. If you had Alec Murdoch in your grips moments after a hideous crime like this, how would you have approached him?
The same way I approach anybody. But I mean, in terms of the approach for the interview, it would be, I would know all these things about him. He's the perfect example of what I've always said is that anyone is capable of any act under the right set of circumstances. Alex Murdoch, oh my gosh, these were the circumstances where he felt he needed to go and murder his wife and blow his son's head off. I mean, it is just, and people that are not around this, and it's a good thing they're not, maybe do not understand that concept. But for him, this is a guy that had all the power, the family. I mean, we've talked about this before. I mean, they've been in that area since 1865 or some such thing. The DAs, the solicitors, they call them in South Carolina, his family had been those people, the DAs, from like 1920 to the 1980s or 1990s. He was never a part of that, except for the fact that I read where he was contracted to work some of these cases. So he wasn't in that same grouping. So they've got a lot of power, they've got a lot of influence, they've got a lot of money, they've got everything that you would think from a human standpoint would say success, success, success. And apparently for him, that wasn't enough, because he got himself off into some things, some activities where it wasn't enough, and he had to start stealing from clients in the law firm, from the law firm itself. And these things just start to accumulate. And then when he gets to the point where he thinks and then we've got these other deaths that are questionable. We've got Buster's, the other son's friend who was homosexual. You've got the boat accident with the son that he murdered. You've got the housekeeper that fell down the stairs. There are so many moving parts in the entire episode that it is hard to get him in some kind of order that would explain why he may have alleged to have done what he did. And so far, I think the evidence is being, I don't see how. It'll be interesting to see what the defense says. I just can't imagine. The only defense that I could see is that the defense attorney acknowledges that he did it and then try to mitigate the punishment.
And Rain Dancer writes, Lady Justice must walk with blindfold. She should not see fame and dollars, but the truth or the lie. Well put there, Rain Dancer. We'll wrap it up because Agent Scott Duffey has got to get rolling in a minute, but I want to give him a big thanks for filling in for the physically big Jonathan Gilliam, muscular, not fat, I want to say. Scott Duffey is director of Wilmington University's Criminal Justice Institute. He's a former FBI special agent out of the Delaware area. Prior to the FBI, he served 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer. Scott, Caroline writes, can we please just convict Alec Murdoch of being a horrible human being? And he's facing 99 criminal charges, and a murder rap is one of the other ones. He's trying to make sense of the Biggie Smalls song, if I'm even right about that. But anyway, long story short here, Scott Duffey, what are your final thoughts, either regarding Alec Murdoch or Brian Kohberger or both?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for continuing to have me on, and your continued always putting the victims first. So that's you're doing right by any victim. And so the Murdochs, just what an amazing case finally put together, and another agency had to step in and put some things together to put an end to what sounds like years and years and years of spiraling downward, and talking about, people around you, both loved ones and those on the outside that are just got caught in this whirlwind. So it sounds like it's all there. And I was just looking at this one statement that, of course, that people say, why would anybody talk to the police? And yet here we have an attorney from a lifetime of attorneys And what did he do? He talked to police.
God bless him.
God bless him. And that one comment, which I think is going to go down, it's just so bad. I did him so bad. That's a conscience of guilt right there. And yes, maybe the investigator taken that didn't quite hear it, and so he didn't go into it. I think Phil and I would have said, "Oh, this is our aha moment." But I think it went right over the head of the investigator. But nevertheless, it was recorded. It was said, it was played, and the jury will ultimately say, I think he said what he said. And so he was confessing. Yeah, so it will be an amazing.
That's super interesting. I forget the direct quote. It was on one of my thumbnails. I think it was, "I did him bad." And yeah. The most fascinating part of that, and it came up in the trial on the witness stand, there was no follow-up to that. You think, like you said, Scott, you think it just went through deaf ears there, Scott?
Yeah, I think it. The investigator was simply just letting him speak, and I don't think he was interviewing him, and so that's why he didn't catch it. And by that time, when you're reviewing your recording and then you're like, oh my gosh, he said what he said. At that point, you don't have a second chance at the bite at that apple. So, but it's a recorded statement, which is nice, as opposed to years ago. If you're just taking notes, it would have never been brought up. But I think it's key. I think it goes to show, and if the interview was done in a way that I'm not just here to take a victim statement. I'm here to interview somebody who very well may be my suspect in front of me. I think that statement, if followed up on, would have had many. It would have gone down a different road that for the prosecution.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to that. The person that interviewed him should have been an experienced detective, specifically in homicides, and should have been a very good interviewer. And I think that's where the failing was here. I think that was just an experience. I think. I don't know how many interviews that person had conducted, but the question about why do people talk to the police? I gave everybody an opportunity to talk to Detective Phil. Everybody. And there were only a couple of times where they just didn't want to talk to me. So, but people do want to talk. And in this particular case, that would have been, gosh, if he'd have expounded on that, because the ultimate goal would have been at the end of these, is what I always did in my interviews, was to get them to demonstrate. Once you've got them making admissions, you start to firm up those admissions and you get more of them. And then you get to the point where you ask them to demonstrate what happened, and they will do it. Once that person makes that admission, in my experience, you cannot shut them up. They're ready to tell you. Now, they may give you some self-serving bullcrap, but they will talk. And then this is important. Once you've got the story out, then you say, okay, kind of show me what happened. And I mean, literally get them up and have them demonstrate for the camera what they did. Let me tell you what, in trial, that particular piece of evidence is irrefutable.
As is this comment right here from Kim Possible. Scott was a great guest too. Nice balance to the panel. We'll have to make it the Fil Gil and something that rhymes with something in Scott's name.
Other than that, man, you're going to start adding people. It's going to look like Hollywood Squares.
Yeah, it'd be like the Brady Bunch. The family will expand. This is our last comment. Pursue your dreams. They're still looking for who killed OJ's wife. Ha ha ha.
Well,
you might laugh, but
he's still looking.
He's still looking, but I just had Dr. Henry Lee on, the famed forensic scientist. He says he could only follow the science. He said there was a second shoe print there. Do with that what you will. This is America's most respected detective, the man you're looking at with the red insignia. That insignia is for Kindred Spirits Investigations, which is Phil's company. He's also a Marine. He also starred in the show The Interrogator, 400 homicide cases. Phil, your closing thoughts. It could be on Baskin Robbins, Brian Kohberger, Alec Murdoch, or all of the above.
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity again to talk about these most complex cases. I think it's
What's your favorite ice cream flavor, by the way? Are you vanilla? Are you vanilla or chocolate?
Chocolate mint chocolate chip.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that.
They also had pink bubble gum. That was pretty good, and it had pieces of bubble gum in it. So, yeah. But no, I appreciate the opportunity. It's been great with you, Scott. I'm always interested to hear other perspectives of the same cases that we're talking about. So yes, very good. And I would hope that people, whatever topic we're on, that instead of hearing what they want to hear, they would listen to what's being said.
Right on cue as my 3-year-old screamed my name. So it is time to go. It's a Friday. Wishing everyone a very happy weekend. Quick programming note. My dear mother will be live every Sunday now at 7 o'clock. We are going to be discussing Maddie Murdoch. My mother is a licensed therapist and said no one's been talking about Maggie Murdoch. So she wants to come on and give her 2 cents. And then we'll be back next week, all week, with the Alec Murdoch trial and breaking news in the Brian Kohberger case. A lovely weekend to you all. Love you, America. And as Phil says, aloha.
Aloha.